Good evening. One more time. Good evening.
Good evening.
Appreciate you. My name is Dr. B. Afina McNeely Cobham. I serve as the Chief Equity and Inclusion Officer at Grand Rapids Community College. The Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion is located in GRCC's historic Bob and Aleicia Woodrick Center for Equity and Inclusion. I was reading through our website not too long ago in search of words that would provide context and tone for tonight's event and came across the following quote from Bob Woodrick. "I believe that racism," he wrote, "is real and that it is wrong, and that its presence with us has not diminished. Furthermore, I believe our denial plays a significant role in making racism. Only when we acknowledge it, our denial can be unmasked and the healing of racism can begin." In 2015, the lives of 9 people were stolen when a gunman entered the Mother Emanuel AME Church in Charleston, South Carolina. Many of us were introduced to Mr. Bakari Sellers on a national level as he offered personal insight into the Charleston community, his relationship with the church's pastor, State Senator Clementa Pinckney, the reemerged debate about the Confederate flag, and America's denial, consistent denial about racism. Attorney Sellers, an infectious community engagement and activist, is captured in the documentary While I Breathe, I Hope, which will air on PBS this Monday. The film follows his 2014 election bid to become Lieutenant Governor of South Carolina. Bakari, an alumnus of Morehouse College and the University of South Carolina School of Law, made history when he defeated a 26-year incumbent state representative and at the age of 22 became the youngest member of the South Carolina State Legislature and the youngest African-American elected official in the nation. He is widely considered to be a rising star within the Democratic Party and a leading voice for his generation. His accomplishments have led to numerous accolades, including being named to Time Magazine's 40 Under 40 and the Route 100 list of the nation's most influential African Americans. On behalf of Dr. Bill Pink, president of Grand Rapids Community College, please offer a Grand Rapids welcome to Bakari Sellers.
Good evening. Good evening. I am not going to use that awesome pulpit. When I got elected, my grandfather was a Baptist minister in Memphis, Tennessee. And he said, "Now, boy, you're going to be going in a lot of churches now that you're an elected official. Make sure you leave all the preaching to the pastor." I said, "Yes, sir." And so I'm going to do my best to not preach tonight and stay out of the well up there. I want to say that I'm from the big city of Denmark, South Carolina, where we have 3 whole stoplights and a blinking light. My mom and dad would always tell me that the 2 most important words in the English language are the words "thank you," because they're not nearly said enough. And so before I begin tonight, I just want to start off by saying thank you to everyone that is in this room and under the sound of my voice, and thank you for inviting me. Thank you to this college campus for opening up their doors and welcoming me with their warm embrace. I'm from South Carolina, and so I'm looking for a warm embrace because what you all have outside, all of that white stuff, is a bit of an anomaly to me. I almost stayed on the plane, but I digress. And so tonight, I know that individuals always like the opportunity to play pundit, and a lot of times you see me on a little box on CNN, and we'll have that moment where you all can spar, we can go back and forth, and I'll answer any questions that you have. I like to say I'm only 34 years old. I haven't been in politics yet long enough to lie. So you're more than welcome to ask me anything you so choose. But before then, I wanted to have a discussion. And I think it's a discussion that, as a community, we need to have. Before then, I wanted to have a conversation about a journey. And as I'm here tonight doing your diversity series, I think that it's important to acknowledge and recognize that anytime you talk about diversity, you're talking about something that's intentional. You're talking about something that's purposeful. And you're talking about a journey. Life is not a singular step, but it's a collection thereof. And so for the purposes of tonight's discussion, we're going to talk about a journey, but every journey has to have a destination. And so the goal for our journey tonight is nothing less than excellence. I think that's what our community deserves. So we'll be taking a journey to excellence. And one of the things that I wanted to talk about tonight, and I want to apologize beforehand for bombarding you with questions that are rooted in such simplicity, but I think they're necessary to answer as we navigate this journey to excellence. Two very, very simple questions. How far have we come, and where do we go from here? Those are going to be the two questions that we attempt to answer tonight. How far have we come, and where do we go from here? And for me, when thinking about the first question of how far have we come, I feel like we have to use some historical context. For me, I always think about 1946. I think about a black man who was deemed to be a Renaissance Negro. He was a Renaissance Negro because he owned a liquor store, he owned a five and dime store, he owned a photography company, and drove cabs on the side. His name was George Elmore. You see, George was unique because he was so fair-skinned that he could pass for being white. And George had the audacity in 1946 to go down to the voter registration office and register to vote. And he actually slipped by. You know, they gave George Elmore his voter registration card. And in that August of 1946, George Elmore decided that he was going to vote in the first Democratic primary he could find. But when George showed up at the polling place, you know, they said, "George, we know you're a Negro. You can't vote here." But George was a man that was filled with so much pride that he did not let that stop him. In fact, he filed a lawsuit which was known as Elmore versus Rice. But as soon as he filed the lawsuit, his liquor store was firebombed. They stopped distributing to his five and dime store. His wife, Mrs. Elmore, actually died in a mental health facility because of all the trauma that she had to undergo, the crosses being burned on her yard, etc. You see, George Elmore, he lost everything. He died a very broken man, mentally, financially, and even physically. But Elmore versus Rice is the reason that African Americans can vote in primaries in this country. So when you think about 1946 and you think about George Elmore, ask yourself the very simple question, how far have we come? And then I like to think about one of the baddest ladies that I've ever heard of. Has anybody ever heard the name Sarah Mae Fleming? Okay, one in a possible, like a bad spades hand. I got one in a possible. See, Sarah Mae Fleming in 1954, Sarah Mae Fleming was a 22-year-old domestic worker. And she had just gotten finished cleaning up a hotel, and she was with her girlfriend. And this story may sound familiar because after work, after doing this back-breaking labor, Sarah was tired. And so she decided she was going to ride the bus home. But her sin was not sitting in the front of the bus. You see, her sin was that when the bus driver told her to get up, of course Sarah did, but she didn't walk out the back door that the Negroes use, she walked out the front. And the bus driver punched her in the stomach and rode her down the steps. You see, Sarah was so unique at the time because she was working for less than minimum wage. Dare I even have to say that when you think about 1955. But even more importantly, and I guess I can actually quote this in this very august building, it reminds me in the book of Isaiah when Isaiah was standing before the full awe and glory of the Lord, and the question was asked, "Who shall go for me?" And Isaiah said, "Here am I, Lord, send me." You see, Sarah was not looking to make history that day. She was not looking to be a heroine. She was not looking to be a shero. But instead, the question was asked, "Who shall go for me?" And she said, "Here am I, send me." And she, along with some enterprising lawyers from the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, they actually laid the foundation in action and law for another young lady who sat down on a bus some 17 months later named Rosa Parks. So again, ask yourself that very simple question, how far have we come? And then I think about 1949. In 1949, there were a group of parents in Clarendon County, South Carolina, which is not far from where I grew up. And these parents, now some of you all have heard maybe not your parents, but your great-grandparents or your grandparents, how they tell the story of having to walk to school like 9 miles, and they walk to school uphill both ways. Well, these parents are actually just a little bit beyond perturbed that their black students had to walk many times up to 9 miles to go to school. And they raised as much cane as they possibly could in front of the school board, and finally they filed a lawsuit against the superintendent. The purpose of the lawsuit, which was known as Briggs V Elliott, was one thing. It was so that black kids in poor rural South Carolina could ride a school bus. Because many times they were getting up at 3:30 or 4 o'clock in the morning and they would see their white peers ride by them. But Briggs V Elliott was a unique case. And why was it unique? Briggs V Elliott in 1949 was unique because it was the first case that was filed in the landmark collection of cases known as Brown versus the Board of Education of Topeka, Kansas. And what happened in Brown? Anybody remember Chief Justice Warren got a very rare unanimous opinion in Brown versus the Board of Education. In fact, back then, judicial splits were so commonplace that when he actually got a unanimous opinion in Brown, people thought that it was insane. But in that ruling, Chief Justice Warren, he said that segregation causes a sense of inferiority by placing children in environments not conducive to learning. Think about that. He said segregation causes a sense of inferiority by placing children in environments not conducive to learning. Since that Briggs family in 1949, ask yourself the very simple question, how far have we come? You see, tonight as we're taking this journey to excellence and we ask ourselves that very simple first question, we have 3 data points that we can use as historical context. The first is George Elmore. And when I think about George Elmore and I think about where we are and I think about how much he had to sacrifice, personally, one human being, how much he had to go through, what he had to see his family go through, his business go through, his finances go through, his wife go through, all so that he could have the franchise, which is the right to vote. And you juxtapose that against today, where consistently people attempt to make it more and more difficult for people to exercise the right to vote. Think about today when just in the well of the United States Congress, there was a push to make voting or election day a national holiday, but it was deemed to be a power grab. Think about today when even individuals in my generation, many of you all in this room, sometimes have peers or even yourself who struggle understanding the significance of casting the ballot or the price that was paid so that we would have that right. And ask yourself, even today, all these years after 1946 and George Elmore gave up all that he could, ask yourself, how far have we come? And then I think about Sarah Mae Fleming, and what did Sarah Mae Fleming want? She just wanted to sit down on a bus because she was tired. She just wanted access to public transportation. And think about today how difficult it is many times for black and brown people, marginalized individuals, to have access to public transportation or affordable housing or, dare I even say, clean water or clean air. What if I were to tell you that there are 100 cities in these United States of America that have a higher lead concentration in their water than Flint, Michigan? Many of those cities are majority African American or Hispanic. But even since Sarah Mae Fleming sat down on that bus, ask yourself that very simple question, how far have we come? And then think about what those parents wanted in 1949. They simply wanted a resource so that their kids would not have to walk to school. And then think about what Chief Justice Warren said by saying that segregation causes a sense of inferiority by placing children in environments not conducive to learning. And now we live in communities where kids go to school and their heating and air don't work, where their infrastructure is falling apart, where their teachers are overworked and underpaid. And ask yourself that very simple question, where we punish kids because of the zip code that they're born into. How far have we come? And I like to say that in my, Madam Trustee, in my 34 years of great wisdom, that was a joke, I have come to the resolve that the answer to the question, how far have we come, is that we've made progress, but we still have yet a ways to go. And so on this journey to excellence, we've answered the first question, so now we have to pivot and answer the next question, which is, where do we go from here? Now, I struggle with this question. This is actually the most difficult question that we have to answer. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., in a book that I actually saw in your office today, asked this very same question. It's actually his second best piece of writing. And no, the I Have a Dream speech is not the first. If you think it's the I Have a Dream speech, we can fight after this. The best piece of writing by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. is what? This is like, you can talk too, it's okay. The Letter from the Birmingham Jail. The second best piece is this book entitled, Where Do We Go From Here? And in that, he gives us two choices. See, Dr. King was fascinating. And that's a whole nother speech. We could talk about how his legacy's been whitewashed and how he actually had an approval rating of the low 30s when he died because he was truly a revolutionary, but I digress. But he would give you these big, bold choices. He would always give his audience these big, bold choices. And he said, to the answer to the question, where do we go from here, is we can either have chaos or we can have community. Now, on CNN, I sit in a studio. Most times I have on shorts or pajama pants. So tonight you actually had me with pants on. That's a plus. And usually I have this little cryon up under me, and it talks about whatever's chaotic going on in the world. I mean, we were talking about the weather last week and the rising river. We can talk about global warming, right? You know that's a hoax perpetrated by the Chinese, right? I was joking. My jokes are not going over well tonight. I'm going to work on those. We can talk about whatever's going on in the Middle East. We can talk about any type of chaos that's coming out of our nation's capital. In fact, sometimes the cryon could just simply say chaos, chaos, and more chaos, right? But see, the challenge for all of us under the sound of my voice is to build community. That's a very difficult task. Let me tell you a story about a young man who was born at 633 Frederick Street in Denmark, South Carolina. His parents were very much middle class. He was born in 1944. When he was 10 years old, something happened to him that fundamentally changed his life. He says that one of the strongest women he had ever known was Emmett Till's mother. And people would say, why do you say that? Why would he say that? Well, there was an image in a building much like this, in a church much like this, and there was a young 13-year-old boy from Mississippi. His name was Emmett Till, of course. And he lay in front of an audience much like this. He lay dead. But the sad and tragic part and the courageous part on behalf of Mrs. Till was that as Emmett, her son, lay before the world dead, she had an open casket. Now, in 1955, why was that such a courageous moment? The reason it was so courageous is because Emmett Till was beaten for allegedly whistling at a white woman. We now know that to not be true, but he was beaten to a point where his face was like a pancake. He literally had no bones intact. And that image was probably one of the most, I guess we say viral images. The word is viral today, but one of the most well-seen images throughout the civil rights movement, except for maybe the images from the Edmund Pettus Bridge during the March in Selma. But many people, many young black people during that time, there was a magazine called Jet Magazine. Y'all remember Jet? It was in Jet Magazine, and they would rip it out. And this young man from Denmark ripped out that image and put it in his wallet, and it spurred this sense of purpose. He became a part of something larger than himself. He joined his local NAACP youth group. He started leading marches and sit-ins. He was a part of what was called the Emmett Till generation. And his parents, they began to get concerned not only for their economic security, but they began to get concerned for his well-being and health, because that's not safe when your son is running around through the Deep South leading movements and sit-ins in his teens. And so they decided they were going to have to get him out of there, so they sent him to Howard University, which is ironic in itself. But they sent him to Howard University so that they could get him away from the movement, which makes absolutely no sense to many people who know about Howard University. And when he got there, he befriended a man named Stokely Carmichael. A little bit of irony in this story. See, Stokely graduated from Howard, but then convinced this young man from Denmark after his sophomore year to drop out of school. And so he did. He dropped out of school and he joined the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, also known as SNCC. His first mission was to go to Philadelphia, Mississippi. How many of y'all have ever been to Philadelphia, Mississippi? It's the size of this chapel, if not much bigger. Their task was to look for the bodies of 3 of their fellow slain civil rights workers. During the day, they would hide in barns and sheds, and at night, they would go out and look in ditches and trenches, and ironically enough, they found the bodies of Goodman, Schwerner, and Cheney behind the home of Edgar Ray Killen, who was a local minister and sheriff's deputy in the town. And that was this young man from Denmark's first indoctrination into the civil rights movement. He then became national field director for the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee until he came back home to South Carolina and became involved in the most deadly civil rights demonstration this country's ever seen. You see, 51 years ago, on the night of February 6th, students at South Carolina State College, as it was known at the time, decided they were going to protest the All-Star Bowling Alley. You see the All-Star Bowling Alley, it sits back in a right angle. It's right along Main Street in Orangeburg, South Carolina. The history books would call it Jim Crow's final hiding place, the last vestige of discrimination. And on that night, on February 6th, the students, 3 of them, were supposed to go in to the bowling alley, and they were supposed to take their seats, and then they were supposed to get arrested, and they were going to combat this injustice in the court of law. But when they got down there, they began to clap and chant and sing these protest hymns, and as they began to get closer and tuck into the right angle, the state troopers and city police began to surround many of the students. And as they surrounded the students and the students got louder, the police began to press up against the students, and the students began to press up against the glass. And as the students pressed up against the glass broke. And the glass broke, the all-you-know-what broke loose. The police began to beat many of the students, but they beat them not with normal police batons. They beat them with batons that were about this long, and at the end they had these leather rawhide whips. There's a young man named James Stroman who would always tell the story about that night watching 2 state troopers hold one young lady while another one beat her. The students that night, they had to go back and they had to heal not only their physical wounds, but their emotional wounds and mental wounds as well. And then came February 7th, 1968. People would say that the tension was so thick, I think is a saying, that you could cut it with a knife. It was kind of like when you're at one of those local college rivalries, or you're in the parking lot after a game and something feels uneasy. You're like, Mom, let's get to the car because something's about to pop off. It's that type of tension, but nothing happened. And then you have that fateful day of February 8th, 1968, when the students, they gathered together again and they went down to the bowling alley, but this time when the police came, they got the right idea. They went back to their campus. I have to stress the fact that they went back to their campus. They went back to their campus. They went back to their campus. They built this huge bonfire, and I don't know how many of you all are familiar with southern winters, but they don't get nearly as cold as it is here, but they get cool, and so the bonfire was warm enough to just warm your bones ever so gently, and the embers would illuminate the darkness, and they began to clap and chant and sing protest hymns as they surrounded the bonfire. They were gathered together, much as we've gathered here today, for a singular cause and a common good, but they did not foresee what would happen next. They did not foresee that South Carolina State troopers had lined up along the embankment in front of their beloved campus. They did not foresee that they would close ranks like they did. They did not foresee that they would have shotguns that were loaded with deadly double-aught buckshots, or the same bullets we use to hunt deer, and they did not foresee that it would be turned on them with deadly intent. And for 8 seconds, 1001, 1002, 1003, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 shots were fired into the group of students. It killed 3, Henry Smith, Samuel Hammond, and Delano Middleton, all 3 under the age of 20 years old. It wounded another 28. This young man from Denmark was actually shot in the shoulder that night. He went to the infirmary, and when he got to the infirmary, they told him there was nothing they could do for him there. His wound was too bad. They took him to the hospital, and when he got to the hospital, he was pointed out, ironically enough, by the only black sheriff's deputy in Orangeburg County at the time, and he was arrested. He was arrested and charged with 5 felony counts, looking at a maximum of 75 years in prison. Not only was he arrested, but when he was taken to the jail and held for bond, they denied his bond, and because he was a member of SNCC and deemed to be an outside agitator, his bond was denied and he was housed on death row. In between the night of February 8th, 1968, and the time of this young man from Denmark's trial, all 9 officers who fired shots into the group of students, all 9 officers who killed 3 young men, who wounded another 28, were found not guilty. This young man from Denmark went to trial, and the lead investigator said that he had misplaced the evidence because of the amount of time that had gone by. However, he was also an eyewitness to the case, and he remembered not on the night of the 8th, but on the night of the 6th, this young man from Denmark who was standing trial lit a Bic and stood on top of a fire truck and said, "Burn, baby, burn." And so his indictment was backdated from February 8th to February 6th, and he was charged, tried, and convicted of rioting, becoming the first and only one-man riot in the history of this country. You see, on that night, injustice, it left mothers without their sons. It left the pages of my state's history stained red with blood. But if you look at this young man from Denmark today and you ask him what's the greatest sacrifice he had to make, he'll say it wasn't being shot, because pain is temporary. And you see that his eyes don't pop like they used to, and you ask him why that is the case, and he'll tell you that it's from shedding so many tears from so many loved ones lost. And you see that his shoulders don't stand as upright as they once did because he was carrying the burdens of so many generations. And he'll say, you know, the greatest sacrifice wasn't being shot, it wasn't being in prison per se, it wasn't being housed on death row. But for him, the greatest sacrifice he had to make was being in jail during the birth of his oldest daughter, or my big sister. Because this young man from Denmark who grew up into a civil rights hero is my father, Cleveland Sellers. And you see, the lessons that I learned from people like Henry Smith and Samuel Hammond and Delano Middleton, those 3 young men who were killed, or Goodman Schwerner and Cheney, or Ella Baker and Fannie Lou Hamer, or Majeska Simpkins and Septima Clark, or Julian Bond, Medgar Evers, Emmett Till, Jimmy Lee Jackson, is that the answer to the question, where do we go from here, lies fundamentally in the ability for us to do 2 things. One is very difficult. The other is something that we're going to have to rededicate ourselves to. Because as we take this journey to excellence, for me, I get energy just from believing and understanding that people paid the ultimate price so that I could stand in a room in Grand Rapids before all of you all today. But I do know that there are 2 things that I have to do. The first is I have to learn and continue to dream with my eyes open. That's not something you just tell children. That's for everyone under the sound of my voice. It's dreaming with your eyes open, and I'm going to explain what that means, because I don't want you to think you flew me all the way up here and I just left you with some rhetoric, be all you can be, go home. But the second is the most difficult, and it's something that I'm working on. And I'll tell you, as a black man in America, it's even much more difficult. I find myself thinking of the Baldwin quote, you know, to be black in America and to be awake is to be in a perpetual state of rage. But everyone in this room, we have to rededicate ourselves to loving our neighbors. But it's a trick to that. We have to rededicate ourselves to loving our neighbors, even when they don't love us. That's the most challenging thing that I'm facing right now, or grappling with on a day-to-day basis. Because on this journey to excellence, I may get the first part right, which is dreaming with their eyes open. Let me explain to you what that means. Some people have asked me as I've traversed the campus, how did you end up where you are, and how did you do these things or win elections? And people can ask questions about that. But when I was 20 years old, I had just graduated from Morehouse College. I was a little young. I had a lot of swag back then, too. And I was preparing to tell my mom and dad what I was going to do with my life. And I remember coming downstairs in the summer of 2005 after I graduated, right before I was beginning my first year of law school. I came downstairs and we had a cook island in our house, and it was like a wet bar, and I leaned against the wet bar, and my mom was cooking spaghetti. I never forget this. My mom was cooking spaghetti, and my dad was doing something that old people do, which I don't understand, which is he was reading the newspaper at the end of the day, which drives me crazy. That's like the oldest news in the world. Why are you reading the newspaper at 6 p.m.? Like, that news is now effectively 24 hours old, right? So he's sitting there, and I kind of lift my shoulders up, and I prepare, and I'm like, Mom, Dad, I'm going to run against Thomas Rhode for the South Carolina House of Representatives. Now, mind you, Thomas Rhode was 82 years old, had been in office for 26 years. Before he was in the State House, he was chair of county council. Before he was chair of county council, he delivered the mail. Before he delivered the mail, he delivered the milk. Like, he literally knew everybody. And without missing a beat, my mom said, well, I'll vote for you. And my dad said, I'll think about it. And so I knew I had a very long way to go. We went out and we knocked on over 2,600 doors. And let me pause. I had to explain this to my friend Corey Booker not too long ago, because I'm from the rural South. And when you say knock on 2,600 doors, that means knock on a door, drive a mile, and then knock on another door. And then we went to over 55 churches. June 13, 2006, I became the youngest black elected official and the youngest state legislator in the entire country from a city with 3 stoplights and a blinking light, which was pretty cool. But something was happening. In our world, and I don't know if you all remember, but around this time, everybody and their mama was running for president of the United States. A lot like today, right? Back then, it was Chris Dodd, Dennis Kucinich, Bill Richardson, Joe Biden, Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama, John Edwards. The list goes on, and I probably missed 15 of them, right? The list goes on and on of the people running for president. And because I was the youngest state legislator and the youngest this and that, and South Carolina is an early primary state, everybody wanted me to endorse them to be president of the United States. I felt like a 5-star athlete. And so I narrowed my choices down to 2 people. It was either going to be John Edwards or Barack Obama. Let's just say, thank God I made the right choice. And I'm the only legislator with a book bag. And so I was going back and forth from the state house to law school. It's funny, I was in law school and I was making the law. You couldn't tell me anything. And so I remember I was going to law school class. I was going to constitutional law class, and my phone rang. And it was from a private number. And let me, if I may, I'm just going to go off script slightly so everyone in here understands. Students, how many students here? Raise your hand. Okay, students, if you get a call from a private number, if you remember nothing else from tonight's lecture, remember this. It's either somebody very, very important, or it's a student loan company calling to get their money back, okay? So just know that. And I picked up the phone and they said, do you have time to speak to Senator Obama? I said, of course. I had met him many times before. And I had a brain freeze. And usually I'm a little wittier than that. I'm usually on my toes. And he picked up the phone. He said, where are you? What's going on? I said, I'm on my way to constitutional law. And I was like, why did I tell him that? Because Barack Obama used to do what? Teach constitutional law at University of Chicago. And so he starts peppering me with questions about where we are and what we're studying. And I was like a really good law student, which means I hadn't read all semester. I was like, what? I was like, speed this up. And finally, he says, Bakari, I want you to endorse me to be president of the United States. He says, now is the time. I say, Senator, I'll do so under 2 conditions. One is that my mom gets an opportunity to work on the campaign. 2, you come to my district. He said, done and done. And so I get an opportunity to travel all across the country for then Senator Barack Obama, and I get to campaign with people like from Harold and Kumar, Cal Penn, and Tatiana Ali, and do some amazing things. And finally they call and they say, Barack Obama wants to come to your district. We have a small problem because I'm from poor rural South Carolina. I ain't had no place to put Barack Obama. And so we settled on South Carolina State University, which was in the gymnasium, which was named after the 3 young men killed in the Orangeburg Massacre. And so I remember that day I pulled up to the State House, and this was at the height of Obama mania. This is January 2008. This is like at the peak. This is right after Iowa, but before South Carolina. So people were coming from all around to see Barack Obama. We had people from North Carolina, Virginia, all over, Arkansas. They just wanted to touch the hem of his garment. And so I go in, I have my State House security with me, and I go to the green room, which was the men's basketball locker room. There's a little stage in center court. It's metal barriers, there's security and Secret Service everywhere, and it's people all around. It's a gymnasium, so you have to speak like this. And in the men's basketball locker room, sitting down was Kerry Washington and Chris Tucker. And so me, Kerry Washington, and Chris Tucker are just having a conversation. We're just chilling. Everything in politics is late. This is actually the first event I've been to in about 3 years that started on time, so thank you for that. And finally, my friend Rick Wade sticks his head in the door and he says, I'm gonna run to the airport, I'll be right back. And he comes back with Usher. And so it's me, Usher, Chris Tucker, and this is a true story, I got pictures. And Chris Tucker and Kerry Washington waiting on Barack Obama. And we're sitting in there. I have a funny Usher story if anybody wants to ask during the Q&A. And the senator pulls up, he hops out, he says, it's go time. And today is actually, I was listening to my introduction. I didn't know if somebody else was, I didn't know who she was introducing. It was such an amazing introduction. But usually I don't even get introductions. I get what's called the VOG, which is the voice of God, and they say, and now, welcome to the stage. And so I go out, and it's people I know, and people are pulling on you, and you're like autographing babies. It is pure pandemonium. And you get to the stage, it's this small stage, and the lights are beaming down on you, and where my sound guy is, imagine just international media, just from wall to wall, everywhere. And I go out and I talk about Dr. King's I Have a Dream speech, but you know, you all always get caught up in the rhythmic cadence of I have a dream that one day we shall, but we forget about the most important part of that speech in which he talks about the fierce urgency of now. And so I talked about the fierce urgency of now and how, you know, I was a kid who graduated from a very poor public school system, but had the audacity to dream that I could become a part of something larger than myself and go out and be a change agent. And here I was standing at the precipice, and I was 23 years old of being able to create the change I wanted to see in the world. And then I turned around and I introduced Chris Tucker, and the decibel level got louder. And then Chris turned around and introduced Kerry Washington, and it got a little bit louder. And then Kerry introduced Usher, and all the women started passing out. And then Usher comes out, and he speaks for way too long, and then he introduces Barack Obama. And it's so loud. Have you ever been to a rock concert, like a Metallica or any type of rock concert, and it's so loud that you just hear buzzing in your ear? That's how it was. And the senator looked at us. He said, you guys are going to have to get off the stage. We were supposed to stand behind him while he spoke. But before we leave the stage, we take this picture. And to my left is Chris Tucker. To my right is the 44th President of the United States. To his right is Kerry Washington. And to her right is Usher Raymond. And people always ask me, hey, like, man, you were 23 years old. Tell me what you were thinking. And I never forget it. I was 300 yards away from where my father was shot. And the blood of my family literally ran through the soil of that great state, where the ultimate price was paid by 3 young men who were the namesake for the gym that we were in, with a black guy running for president of the United States. Now, if that don't mean something to somebody, I don't know what will. I was 19 miles away from when I was 20 years old. I had the audacity to dream with my eyes open and tell my parents that I was going to run for office because I decided I wanted to change the world. That's what young people think. Y'all know that, right? Y'all do know we firmly believe we can change the world. And although I was only 19 miles away from my home and 300 yards away from where those shots were fired, I had gone so far. You see, that's the concept of dreaming with your eyes open. And you don't have to be 40, 50, 60 years old to say, oh my God, my dreams are now done. In fact, we need everyone under the sound of my voice to believe that they too can dream with their eyes open. And you see, that's the journey that we're on together. That's this journey to excellence. And before we take questions, I have to do one more thing because I'd be remiss if I didn't, which is I think many people don't even know what the definition of excellence is. All right? I'm taking you on a journey and you don't even know where we're going. Because as you ask yourself the first question, which is, how far have we come? And you think about the stories of George Elmore. All right? And if you don't even have to remember my name, I just want you to remember one of the 3 names of the individuals that I told you. Remember either George Elmore and everything he gave, or remember Sarah Mae Fleming and everything that she gave, or remember the Briggs family and everything they gave. I believe that you'll come to the same response that I have when people ask you, how far in this country have we truly come? And I laugh when people say, you got a black president, y'all have made it. And I just chuckle. And I say, we've made a lot of progress in this country, but we still have a very long way to go. And then I pivot and I try to be forward thinking and hopeful, although it's difficult at times. She mentioned the Charleston massacre, which we can talk about during Q&A if you so choose. It's hard to be hopeful at times, but you remember that even in your darkest moments of despair, and you get kind of downtrodden over the fact that we still have so far to go, you still have to embrace your dreams and order your steps. And then when a young man like Dylan Roof comes in and murders your good friend and 8 others while his wife is in the church and his daughter is in the church, you know what the community did down there? They actually loved him, even though he did not love them. You see how powerful that is? I don't know if I'm there yet, I'm still walking in my Christian journey, as people say. I ain't there yet, but I do hope to get there one day. And then as we go through all of these things, I think that my task in life is to only reach this goal of excellence, because I firmly believe we live in a culture of low expectation, and the worst part of that is oftentimes you get what you expect. But I define excellence as this, and I'll leave you with this quote, and then we'll open it up and take questions. The greatest educator of all time is a young man named Benjamin Elijah Mays. And with all due respect, if your mama's an educator, she could be number 2. I'm sorry. But the greatest educator of all time is Benjamin E. Mays. Without Benjamin E. Mays, there's no Martin Luther King Jr., and the list goes on and on and on. But he said, in all things that you do them so well that no man living, dead, or yet to be born can do them better. That's what's required of us today on this journey to excellence. Now, I will also share with you that as we live for other people, as we attempt to become a part of something larger than ourselves, as we reach back and help those communities that have given us so much, you have to understand that along this journey, you may not get rich, you may not be famous, you may not see your name in lights. But for me, it's the Medgar Evers and Emmett Tills, it's the Henry Smiths, the Samuel Hammonds, the Delano Middletons, it's the Goodman Schroerners and Cheneys that maybe one day will be able to look down upon me and simply say, job well done. So with that, I say thank you, and let's have some fun and ask some questions.
Testing, okay. Just 2 quick announcements before Q&A. For the students who are here, I was informed via text, make sure you pick up your attendance verification slip. It's at the info desk. So please be sure to get that so you can give it to your professor. The other thing is we'll do Q&A till 8 o'clock, and then I will ask people to step away from the mic. Thank you. Any questions?
I thought y'all were here to see me. I didn't know y'all were here because y'all got credit. I felt good about the room for a minute. I was like, man, I'm getting more and more famous out here. You're just here to get extra credit. Ask anything you wish, please. Sure. Yeah, yeah, sure.
Good evening.
Yeah. Is it on? There we go.
How you doing? First, I also want to say congratulations to you and your wife.
Yeah, man, I'm half asleep up here. Forgive me. Thank you. They are 37 days old today, so yeah, it's awesome.
So here in West Michigan, although we do have a growing economy, if you will, and some might consider this kind of a resource-rich area, there are still significant disparities, economic, health, education, amongst many others. And working kind of with young people on the front lines, just in your perspective, what do you think is step 1 to supporting one's sense of agency and empowerment?
So thank you. That's a very good question. So step 1 is understanding. It's kind of having some wherewithal and awareness. I always talk about systems of oppression in this country. All right. For example, I am not concerned about an individual calling me nigger. All right. I'm not. In fact, Stokely Carmichael defined racism best. Stokely said, if you want to lynch me, then if you want to lynch me, that's your problem. If you have the power to lynch me, that's my problem. So it's a power dynamic, right? But I do focus on systems of oppression, and that's where you get these disparities. And so when I talk about that, I look at the Flint, Michigans, or the Denmark, South Carolinas when you talk about these environmental injustices you face, because that doesn't happen in Dana Point, California, right? That doesn't happen in the Hamptons, for example. When you talk about these educational injustices and how kids are punished because of the zip code that they're born into, you have these corridors of shame in this country where you can literally go into schools that were built in 1949, 50, 51, 52, where kids go to school and they're in trailers, like primary schools, where kids go to school in trailers. They walk through the mud to get to their classroom. I went to a school the other day, and they were in a trailer. It was pre-K, 4-year-old kindergarten. Yeah, 4-year-old pre-kindergarten, and there was one bathroom for the boys and girls. So you can talk about that system. You can talk about our criminal justice system and how it disproportionately punishes people of color, right? So there are all of these systems, and I think the first step that in order to recognize your agency, to kind of understand your purpose, is you have to recognize these systems exist, right? And you have to not get caught up in the sensationalized rhetoric that will get you off kilter. And you have to focus on how you're going to disentangle these systems, how you're going to deconstruct these systems, and then rebuild them. And so the question is, how do you do that, right? Everybody's like, what do I do? For me, I decided I was going to be a part of the system and try to deconstruct it from the inside. I am an elected official, or was an elected official, right? I'm a recovering legislator, so forgive me sometimes. It's like a 12-step program for those of us who have been beat in office before. And so you have to understand what your purpose is. I have friends like DeRay and Brittany and others, and we have conversations all the time because they put pressure on these systems externally, and you have to figure out, but all in all, my goal and their goal is we oftentimes argue over this, but I say I want to give a voice to the voiceless. And then DeRay tapped me on the hand and he says, they're not voiceless. They've been speaking for a long time. They've just been unheard. And so you have to give a voice to the unheard. And so what I would tell those individuals to do is and I'm sure they're already doing this, is just understand their communities around them. Understand those systems of oppression that affect those communities. And then go out and be change agents and understand that it ain't gonna be a lot of us out there doing this work. A lot of times you'll be by yourself and doing that good yeoman's work, which is gonna help change the community that you're in. I always tell people, if you go to the South, you can count 10 black folk, in it, especially like Atlanta, 10 black folk above the age of 60, and all 10 of them will tell you how they marched with Malcolm and Martin, when in all honesty, only one of them was really there. And you just realize that a lot of times these movements for social justice and change, they start with young people, and usually there ain't a whole lot of them. And so you gotta help keep them motivated as well. And the last thing that I do that I would tell you, that's kind of the first step, is understanding having the awareness of those systems around you. And the second thing I'll tell you is to make sure that they're practicing some form of self-care. Because people want to change the world all the time. And they change the world but lose themselves. And you're no good to me if you're physically, spiritually, emotionally, or mentally unhealthy. And so you have to make sure you take care of yourself. Hope that answered your question. Yes, sir.
Yeah, hi. I love the focus of how far we've come, because I think we lose sight of that, especially looking at how things are now. But I actually brought a bunch of students here, and tonight we're talking about education and issues of race, and it's been more than 60 years since Brown v. Board of Education, and desegregation was we made a concentrated effort for a long time, but we've also seen in the last 20, 30 years now, through legal cases in particular, and Supreme Court cutting back on oversight, some of that progress has
been chipped away.
Backslid. Can you speak a little to that?
Well, yeah, and I think that you're making my first part of my speech more depressing than I thought it actually was. Goodness gracious. So yeah, when you look back at Brown, I think you have to legitimately ask yourself that question of how far we've come. And so there is I don't mean to sound this way, but do people understand the concept of equity versus equality? Okay, good. And so we are forgetting about the equity part of this conversation. Where I'm from, kids just want access, right? When I was in the legislature, tell me what my greatest accomplishment, I smile, right, from like ear to ear, is like so cool. My first 2 years I was in office, man, I built a library, right? I was a black Democrat in the South. I didn't pass any bills. I wasn't there to pass legislation, duh. But like I was able to get some money in the budget, and I built a library. It was like $1.3 million. It's in my hometown. I'm trying to get them to name it after somebody in my family. I didn't make it, the city council being difficult, but I digress. And everybody's like, so why are you excited about that? Tell me why a library in the poor rural South means, well, because people don't have access to the internet, because there's a technological divide that is huge, right? And because fundamentally now, this goes to your point, I'm not like Kyrie Irving, but the world is flat. Okay? The world is fundamentally flat. It's a Friedman book. It's actually, I'm not a big Friedman fan, but it was a good book, okay? Why do I say the world is flat? Because when you graduate, right here, you're no longer competing with kids who graduate from the University of Michigan or Michigan State. You're no longer competing with kids who graduated from Illinois or Georgia Tech. You're now competing with kids who graduated in the UAE, London, Dubai, etc., because the world is fundamentally flat. Every single day on Twitter, I talk to people around the world because our interconnectivity breeds this hyper-competitiveness, and we're not preparing kids for this 21st century global economy, right? And so one of the things that we've passed by and we've forgotten about, and a lot of times it has to do with that ugly word in this country, which begins with the R and is called race, right? Is that a lot of these kids simply don't have access. We have schools in South Carolina where you can go and They had these huge campuses, and they had like buses from one campus to another. They got like the Wall Street Journal in there. Every kid gets a laptop to take home. And then you go to my school where teachers would push around carts, 98.5%, 99%, free and reduced lunch. We didn't have, I remember in my senior year, there were certain classes where, y'all had to share books where there weren't enough books until like, I don't know, like October. So this was how do you expect a kid like that to compete? The kid can be the most brilliant kid in the world, but how do you expect them to be able to compete when you don't have the resources? And since Brown, we haven't fully addressed that. And so the question is, and hindsight's always 20/20, and my dad was the director of African American Studies before he became a college president. And we would always ask, should the mission and the fight of the movement then have been integration? Or should it have been resources, thinking that integration would have come eventually? Right? But 20/20 is always, hindsight is always 20/20. So yeah, I think you're right, and I wish we had some more answers to the question. But I do know where I am, right? And I do know that you all have a direct line to the Secretary of Education, so call her and get some answers, okay? I'm from out of town, you putting that on me. I'm gonna go to the hotel down there and sit in the lobby and see if they show up. I don't know. No, we'll do this side and then this side. Thank you for you coming.
I'm 7 years old, and I am heartened by the fact that young people today do not seem to have the degree of racism that I was infused with. I grew up as a little girl reading Little Black Sambo.
Mm-hmm.
There were no blacks in our neighborhood. They couldn't afford the house, and they weren't allowed to buy the houses in the suburbs. So there were none in my high school. And still, I had some contact at some point because I remember someone telling me that black kids smell funny. And I didn't realize when I was older that was poverty. That wasn't black skin.
Yeah.
That was just poverty.
Yeah.
And there were some white kids that smelled funny.
Amen.
Yeah. And then now that I'm, I was in high school still, with our school, our coach, a basketball coach, found it necessary to tell us spiritual jokes. He could not tell us these racist jokes. And I was at a moral age then, and I was upset. But there was nothing I could do with my upset.
Well, let me answer. That's not a question, but you make me interject at this point because I always tell people that in this journey we need more allies. And so I'm gonna speak to white people in the room, right? I'm sorry for being so blunt with my critiques and comments in the room. But, a lot of times it's not the message as much as it's the messenger. And there's certain rooms that you all can go in and certain conversations you all can have with people that they're not gonna listen to me. There's certain ways that you can disarm people and be able to talk to them about the issues of race and racism in this country and bigotry and xenophobia. And the blessing about, now I'm a millennial. I think the people in this room who are like 24 and under, 23 and under, they're Generation Z, which sounds like the end of the world. You guys need a new generational name. But the reason they're so cool is because, well, there are two reasons, but the one reason they're so cool is because they've all grown up with someone who is undocumented, someone who is black, someone who's gay, right? They've seen all of this level of diversity in the communities around them. They are an active participant in what is the browning of America. So that helps them understand the diversity and the value of diversity. So they're going to be good agents and good allies. The other thing is they're really cool because like 4 weeks ago we were, and this alludes to your first point, 4 weeks ago we were concerned about, or 4 months ago we were concerned about this young generation eating Tide Pods. And now they're like changing gun laws around the country. It's phenomenal to see, right? And so I have a lot of faith in my generation and the generation below, but I also have a lot of faith in you. Because I don't know if you truly understand the power that you have to go in these rooms and be these change agents. Because at 70 years old, you were preparing for other things right now. You were not preparing for people's comments, criticisms, and critiques. You were living your life. And so you can tell them to go to, I'm in this church.
Kind of can.
But
yeah.
yeah. I'm sorry. But yes, you can say what you want. So I appreciate that, but we need more allies like you.
One of the points I wanted to question
Sure.
was that in our political discourse, and particularly I'm loving all the young people and women who are coming into our government to finally clean it up. But in our discourse, we're still talking about passing lynching laws, and we're still talking about lynching.
Yeah, well, that's because lynching still happens.
Yes, and that goes to your point, how far have we?
Yeah, I mean,
And I want to just ask you, how do we detox the older generations from the...
That's a good question. I don't know the answer to that. One of the blessings and one of the things I learned about being a decent lawyer and a decent politician is you have to tell people when you don't know the answer. I don't know the answer. I will tell you this. I am very, very critical of the 45th president of the United States. But it's funny, we talked about this earlier, how Butt negates everything before it. We would not be having, for better or for worse, the dialogues that we're having about race in this country if Donald Trump was not president of the United States. Now, you can say however we got here, that ain't even up for debate, but that's not helpful at this moment. But we are talking about race in a way in this country that we have not addressed it publicly before. But with that, we're also seeing the rise of anti-Semitism. We're also seeing the rise of xenophobia. We're also seeing the rise of racism. Not necessarily the rise, but we're seeing the perfect example. The what?
The openness.
The openness. So this is what I tell people. What's your name?
Ada?
Say it again.
Ada, AD.
Hey, that's a beautiful name, Ada. So this is what I tell people all the time. Maybe you'll agree with me. What was the most amazing thing about Charlottesville? You know, when they had what was the most amazing thing?
Amazing, just people coming together against the racism.
Yeah, that was, what did you find? Maybe amazing is not, I'm usually channeling my best Don Lemon self, but I didn't ask a good question. What stuck out to you most? Was it still people coming together to protest?
I get the brazenness.
It's the brazenness. What was the most amazing thing to me about Charlottesville is that people were going out chanting anti-Semitic racist things and they didn't wear hoods. Like they didn't even have to hide. And you know, when I tell people that, back to your point about systems of oppression, right? This all ties in together. I'm not loony, okay? This all ties in together because these people are bankers. They're teachers' assistants, right? They're physicians' assistants. And so how do you think a black person or a gay person or an Hispanic person going to the local community bank where somebody was just marching in Charlottesville is their banker and they want a small business loan, right? So that's how this racism permeates these systems that we're talking about. So the fact that the brazenness, that's true. They didn't even have to wear, I know we're running short on time. I'm gonna let you ask your question, both of you guys. So that was what's the most amazing thing about this. And now because Donald Trump is president of the United States, we're having these discussions. Yes?
How you doing?
I'm good, man.
My name is DeAndre Jones. I actually won 10 grand back in June to create a program for nonviolence going against the biggest nonprofits. And I'm a lefty too, so one of my dreams was to be president. Kind of cool to meet you because I like the work that you've done. And
Thank you, man. I appreciate that. You can have the presidency, man. That's a tough job.
That's something
I'll work for you. I'm going to pass that on to you.
It's something I actually really aspire to do. I'm serious.
Cool.
Like all seriousness. But I wanted to know, what do you feel like are some great nonviolent techniques that could be, how do I say it? Reincorporated in today's world that can make a difference? And what was your mindset like at 24 years old? Because I'm 24 now, so I kind of want to know what all the work you've done. Like,
Yeah, so what are some of the things that we can do to help people move more towards nonviolence? Legalize marijuana. But we can also, that was actually serious and in jest all at the same time. But we can also study those individuals who did it extremely well. You know, I want people to really get to know who Martin Luther King Jr. was. I want people to know who Malcolm X was when he went on his voyage to Mecca. You know, I want people to understand who Gandhi was. I want people to read Nelson Mandela and understand that none of them were shrinking violets. You can be a revolutionary and be nonviolent. You can be angry. I mean, in fact, I anticipate because you're a 24-year-old black man, you actually are angry every single day.
Yeah, with society.
Exactly, and that's okay. Anger is not a sin. Don't ever let anybody tell you that it is. Anger is not a sin. How it manifests itself, and if it paralyzes you, then that's the problem. But you're going to have to go out and utilize that anger, utilize that burning sensation inside of you to be able to help those people around you. And so the way that you do it is to make sure that you have more soldiers on your battlefield. I know we're running short on time, so I'm going to tell you what I mean by that. You have to go out and be an example. Before you're president of the United States, even at 24, what was I doing trying to be an example? I had already won 2 elections by then. I was pretty good. I just lost my last one. I'm bitter about that, man, if you haven't noticed. But does anybody know Jacob Philadelphia? Raise your hand if you do. I don't expect many people to know Jacob Philadelphia. Jacob Philadelphia, when he became famous, was 4 years old. He was actually from Philadelphia. Both of his parents were Secret Service agents. The most amazing thing, and I'm kind of speaking quickly because we have to go. The most amazing thing about Jacob Philadelphia, his parents were Secret Service agents, and when you are a Secret Service agent, you get to take a picture with the protectee when you retire. Who did Jacob's parents protect? Barack Obama. So the family got to take a picture with Barack Obama as they retired. Jacob Philadelphia was 4 years old, and in the South, we have this saying that you could be casket sharp. Jacob Philadelphia was casket sharp. Why do we say that? Because on your final day, you have to look the best, right? Because you ain't gonna get a chance to look no better. So Jacob had on his black slacks and his white shirt, and he got to go in the Oval Office and he got to talk to Barack Hussein Obama. Do you know what he asked Barack?
I don't.
Jacob Philadelphia was 4 years old, and he had the President of the United States in front of him, and he asked him what was the most important question that anybody could ask the President of the United States at that time. He said, Mr. President, he said, what does your hair feel like? Does your hair feel like mine? And the president leaned over and Jacob reached up and touched his head. Why was that important? It was important because Jacob was able to then see that the President of the United States, the most powerful man in the world, had a little kink in his hair like him. It showed that the texture of his hair meant that Barack Obama was like him, and he too could then be President of the United States. There were little brown kids all around the world who felt like they could be that powerful one day because Barack Obama was that example. It's the second most powerful image to come out of that White House, I believe. I think the first was the Situation Room when they were all sitting around and they looked real like they were doing some business and they killed Osama bin Laden. The second was this picture. So in order for you to practice that element of nonviolence, you need more people on your playing field.
I just met the governor today, so it's crazy you said that.
Yeah, so make sure that you include more people in your circle, more good people, and the way you do that is by being an example. Let me take our last question, and then I'm gonna make y'all run me out of this chapel. I'm having fun.
Hi, good evening. My name is Roz Sullivan, and my husband's great-grandfather was one of the first blacks that was elected to the South Carolina legislature during Reconstruction.
Oh, wow.
So when we heard that you were going to be here tonight,
Well,
it
thank you
really
so much.
resonated with our hearts.
The amazing part about that is that the last time prior to Tim Scott, which Tim Scott ran when I ran, which was 2014, the last time that an African American was elected statewide in South Carolina was 1876 during Reconstruction, during the period in which your family was also. Why was that the case? Because there were more Negroes than there were anybody else at the time.
That's exactly right. With regards to your comment, how far have we come? I have 2 sons, and I have a huge circle of family and friends, and people, both white, black, Hispanic, gay, you name it. I'm just an equal opportunity lover.
That's good.
And so after the election, people were so devastated in 2016, I ended up having to, my phone was going all night long. I ended up hosting a luncheon because I just physically needed to pull everyone together, and everyone kept saying to me, well, the same question, how far have we come? And I answered them by saying, we came too far for some and not far enough for others. And so my question to you is, and you began to answer it for this woman who gave her testimony, how do we reach those that think we've come too far? Because at the fundamental issue is fear.
Yeah.
That they are afraid of brown and black and beige and others.
So some people will not be reached. That's a fact. And I know that's difficult to comprehend, but there's I'm not a big proponent of the belief that economic anxiety is this big thing. I believe economic anxiety is something that my friends made up on the set of CNN one day and was like, that sounds real good. I actually think it was cultural anxiety and the fear that you were going to be replaced by somebody who was gay or other that led to the pushback, okay? So that's kind of first. To a more philosophical point, to answer some of your question and some of your question, and the young lady who is going to be my new chain at the age of 70. I love her. My grandmother had a saying, and I'll kind of wrap up on this. My grandmother had a saying that you can't fall off the floor. Now, you know how old people say stuff and it don't make sense till you get a little older? When she used to say that, I was like, Grandma, who gonna stay with her in the home? Because that don't make no sense, right? But it makes perfect sense. She would always say, you can't fall off the floor. And see, when you look around, and this is the challenge that we all have, you look at the way that Muslim Americans are treated in this country. You look at the way that African Americans are treated in this country. You look at the way that gay people are treated in this country, the disabled women in this country. The list goes on and on. The way we treat our veterans in this country. I mean, why do we have homeless veterans? Can somebody tell me that? Like, that don't make no sense. But anyway, you look at all of this, and then everyone seems as if they're all on the floor together. But the problem is that you can't be selfish in your struggle, which many times we become. So what does that mean? That means you're not going to find any greater pro-choice advocate than I. And when there's a women's march, I'm going to be out there with my daughter waving the biggest sign I can find. I want my daughter to have a president that looks like her one day, right? But I also expect that when there's a young black man who's unarmed and killed by police, that I'm not marching alone, right? That those same college-educated white women that I was marching with on the front lines for reproductive rights are there with me in my same shoes, understanding what I am trying to do. The reason that that is the case is because you cannot be selfish in your struggle. And so when there are individuals who are undocumented, who are trying to get a pathway to citizenship, you have to be willing to shed your struggle for that one moment and go and stand with them, right? And when there's a Muslim ban, you have to shed your struggle and then go to the airports and stand with them. Now, it's going to be a lot of standing. You're going to get really tired, but that's kind of what's required right now because my grandma was right. You can't fall off the floor. So we don't have any choice but to get up. But we all have to do that together. So I'll end where I began, which is to simply say thank you and God bless you all.